and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 132, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
And there are hairy legs everywhere in the studio tonight.
Oh, God, it's a heat wave still, isn't it? And I think due to global warming, we're probably going to have this forever now.
It does feel like, I mean, I know we go out to audiences all around the world, but I think this heat wave is pretty much a global phenomenon. Tomorrow, apparently, we're recording this on Wednesday night, it's going to be like 36 degrees here in the UK.
Yeah, there's been fires in Greece. There's been, in Japan there's been a massive heat wave as well. It's all over the place.
I will admit that I've not been inside playing many video games recently.
No, I haven't. I've tried to go on the VR, but God, that thing's sweaty in this weather. I don't want to get on that.
I mean, I imagine a lot of people will be listening to this week's show maybe on, like, you know, hot beaches around the world.
In the garden.
Yeah, just taking it nice and easy. Nice chilled drink in your hand, maybe. Well, if you are new to the Retro Hour podcast or you listen every week, thank you so much for being there. The show comes out every Friday. Ravi and I talk about what's happening in the world of retro gaming, and there's been a lot of retro gaming news. Some new Atari Jaguar controllers we need to talk about soon. A prologue to one of your all-time favourite adventure games, a fan-made project that looks incredible, and also an unreleased Battletoads game. Remember, that was massive back in the day. So more about those coming up soon. And this week's guest, now every week on the show, I think, you know, the reason we started doing this podcast is to give, you know, us a chance to talk to our heroes and the people that were behind the games that we grew up playing.
Totally. And this guest we've got actually came to us, Jake Simpson. And, you know, he's done some fantastic stuff. He's worked with Midway, Raven Software, Williams, Ed Boon, you know, Mortal Kombat, and even Eugene Jarvis, who we've had on the show.
Yeah, he was like one of his heroes, and you got to work with him at Midway as well. And he's a really interesting guy. I mean, I remember, like, growing up playing Midway games. Everyone knows the Mortal Kombat franchise. And there was also a game that not many people know about, and you're a fan of Judge Dredd, weren't you?
Oh, massive fan. Still am, yeah. I've just heard that they're making the Rogue Trooper movie, which was one of the 2000 AD characters, and that is going to be awesome, trust me.
Well, did you know that Midway kind of made a Mortal Kombat-style Judge Dredd game?
I won it because the Dredd game I remember on the PlayStation was this big first-person shooter, and that wasn't very good. It was hard, but I played it to death because it was still Dredd.
Well, this game actually looked pretty good. It was like, you know, kind of digitized graphics like Mortal Kombat was.
Cool.
But for some reason it got shelved and never got released.
Well, let's find out why.
Well, we'll find out all about that and more. A special on Midway, Williams, Raven Software, all of that kind of genre. You're going to love this. Jake Simpson is our special guest on the Retro Hour podcast in around 15 minutes from now. And we've had a pretty busy week, actually. You've been all over.
Yeah, I went to the Retro Man Cave and did a DJ set, and that should be up on his channel this week. And if you see it, I'm sweating to death in it, because in this weather, in a kind of basement underground with lights on and all this heat, God, that was intense. But it was a really good time, yeah.
I heard there's some dodgy dad dancing going on as well.
Oh, yeah, there's always dodgy dad dancing.
And you did like this, you give me a little preview of this video. Is it out yet on your channel?
Yeah, it's out on my channel.
It's kind of like a music quiz, essentially retro games that have been ripped off in pop music.
Yeah, I'm going to turn this into a whole series, because I've just released this one video and lots of people have said, oh, I know another example. And then there's the opposite, which is video games taking off pop music.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm going to continue that and check out my video.
Yeah, we'll put those in the show notes at theretrohour.com. And, of course, we've got Play Expo coming up next month, and we'll be contacting our competition winners, and then Play Expo Blackpool later on in the summer.
And you've got a new game with you there, haven't you, Dan?
Yeah, that I left out in the office here. But it's called Worthy.
Worthy, yeah, and this is a full box, and this is a big box, you know what I mean? They haven't kind of cut the price on the box here. It looks really nice.
It looks like, I mean, it's a new Amiga game. We did mention it on the show about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do a YouTube video on this, but, I mean, yeah, I got sent it in the post today. I opened it, and it looked like... Do you remember when you used to walk into, like, Electronics Boutique and see Amiga games on the shelf?
And they had that, it was kind of like a normal box, but it had that really nice sleeve over the top of it.
It looks amazing. I mean, yeah, I hope no one nicks it out in the office.
That's it.
But, yeah.
They would need to find an Amiga to run it on first.
But yeah, we'll put links to our YouTube channels as well, because we do YouTube as well as a podcast. You know, we like to keep active, don't we?
Yeah, you can actually see us rather than hear us.
You do get people sometimes who only listen to the podcast, and then... You might get this on your channel. Some people comment, "You're the guy for the podcast, aren't you?"
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't think you look anything like that.
Yeah,
what did you
total
think
different images, yeah.
I had one guy say to me once, this is probably about 10 years ago, when I was on the radio, he thought, you don't look anything like you sound. He goes, I thought you'd be a short, little, stubby, fat guy, which I've turned into since. So, you know, maybe sealed my fate there. Yeah. So, yeah, if you want to check out our YouTube channels, we'll put links in the show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, that is also the place where you can help out the Retro Hour, because not only have we been doing YouTube, not only have we been travelling, but also been working a bit on our upcoming... We're kind of having a bit of lick of paint to the show, aren't we?
Yeah, let's call it a Retro Hour 2.0, where we're basically going to have a lick of paint, we're going to have nicer website, we're going to have it easier to access our back catalogue, which is really important, because a lot of people have said, you know, oh, get this guy on, and it's like, he's been on previously.
Yeah, 2 years ago, click back.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're going to help us out with that, Ravi, and we're changing our hosting soon for the podcast as well, to hopefully get it out to more people. So a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and I was working out the other day, probably going to cost us about $1,000 to launch Retro Hour 2.0. So any help that we get with that, I mean, look, we don't mind paying for the show. We do pay a lot of it out of our own pockets. But if you'd like to help us out with that, everything we get into donations goes fully back into the running of the Retro Hour. And you can make a donation via PayPal or cryptocurrency. We have little links on the front page of our existing website, theretrohour.com, and you will get a mention on a future episode and find your place in the Hall of Fame. Just like Paul Edwards,
Marvin Drugsma,
Roger McNally,
and Steve Clifford,
who all made donations into the running of the show. You can do the same at theretrohour.com. Now, I make no secret of the fact that I am a bit of a fan of NAF consoles.
Yeah, definitely. You got a CD32, a Jaguar, CDI. You've probably got a huge collection of NAF consoles, probably more than better, nicer, modern consoles. Yeah.
3DO, I've got one of those as well. I was playing on my CDI over the weekend. I was playing Space Ace.
Okay, yeah, I remember Space Ace. That was that one where it's kind of like Dragon's Lair, where you have to select a direction.
Yeah,
and you have to remember the sequence. Yeah,
press left, press. Oh, you fell off a bridge. Yeah, that kind of thing. But also the Atari Jaguar. Now, the Jaguar was an interesting one, because I do remember when it initially came out back in the day. Didn't pay a lot of attention to it. I mean, I was a bit more into computers then than I was consoles. But I remember all the claims it was 64-bit, you know, and everything, which...
Do the math.
Yeah, there was all that, wasn't there? And I've done videos about the Jaguar, and I think it is a very interesting system. But over time, I mean, you saw at Play Expo in Glasgow that they had an original price tag on a Jaguar from back in 2000, and it was like 10 quid.
It was 10 quid, from Virgin, because they were getting rid. And then they had like today's price tag next to it, which was around 400 or 500, and I was like, God...
More than they cost when they were brand new.
If we had a time machine.
Well, there is so many stories like that. You know, things become more collectible over time. And the Jaguar, actually, stuff for it is very collectible. I mean, there are games for the Jag, stuff like Atari carts that'll generally go for about 150
quid. Oh, and that
each.
CD add-on, and that one's really collectible.
They're about 400 quid, yeah. I mean, if you're lucky on a good day. But also, there were, I don't know if you've ever seen these, Atari Jaguar Pro controllers.
No, because I remember the original controllers, and they had that little weird numpad on the bottom, didn't they? And you could put an overlay for certain games on it. And, you know, a lot of people diss that controller, but apparently you were saying it was all right to use, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the most uncomfortable controller in the world. The number pad thing, a bit gimmicky. And, you know, unless you're looking at it, you would never remember what anything does, which is kind of the downside to it.
What's the difference with the Pro and the original then?
More buttons.
Oh, okay, more? Wow.
So they released, Atari released this quite late in the console's life. So essentially where you normally get the 3 fire buttons, they put an additional 3 smaller buttons above it. And you've also got shoulder buttons as well.
Oh, they like auto fires or something like that? Or is it just
extra fire
functions?
Buttons, really? But I mean, there weren't many games that took advantage of it. I've got a feeling Primal Rage.
Okay.
You could do. I mean, there were a few that if the game was written to take advantage of it, then it could. But also the good thing about it is the controller ports that you've got on the Jaguar also work on stuff like the Atari STE and the Falcon.
The D-sub ones, are they?
Yeah, well, they're actually like VGA connectors have got more plugs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So they're called enhanced joystick ports. So at the moment, I mean, the thing about it is these Pro controllers are very rare.
Yeah, I've never heard of them or even seen them, so yeah.
Well, if you go on eBay, I mean, generally you're going to be paying about 200 quid each. You know, that's how expensive they are. And they're quite collectible, you know, people who want a Jaguar collection, the Pro controllers are, you know, something that people want. So at the moment, there is a couple of guys on the Atari Age forum. A guy called Star Wonder is the main guy behind it. And he's actually going to be making some Atari Jaguar Pro controllers reproductions.
Oh, nice. Wow. Atari Age is really one of these kind of forums where people are really active. You know, they make repo carts and now repo controllers. This is crazy. So how's he doing it? Is he like 3D printing it or what's going on?
No, he's going to get them actually made into a proper mould. They're going to be like remaking exactly pretty much the quality as the original controllers were back then. And he's got a couple of other guys working with him. One guy's called Clint Thompson, who's got a bit more experience in doing stuff like that. And together, I mean, they've actually got some of the prototypes in that apparently are working pretty well, and they put pictures up there as well. And essentially, it's going to be an exact replica of the original controller, apart from on the back it won't have the Atari logo.
Yeah, wise move.
Yeah, so, just to play it safe. But they're going to be selling these for $60 per controller, and you can order them in like packs of 2. So, I mean, bearing in mind, like I said, the originals are about 150, 200 quid for one.
That's awesome, because I know a lot of modern consoles have like pro controllers and normal ones, but I don't remember a lot of the old ones, so having these will be great, for that price. It seems all right as well.
And it happens with other systems. I mean, there are like, exact clones of the NES and SNES and controllers and stuff like that.
Yeah, everywhere, so...
Having stuff, like the Jaguar that is, not a platform that gets a lot of love in the general world of retro gaming, but does have its hardcore fan base. And at the moment, they reckon they need about $30,000 it's going to cost them to do this campaign. And I think they've got about 400 orders so far at $60 each.
Okay.
So, I mean, again, they reckon with an adapter, though, this will actually work on the Atari 5200, 2600, the Atari 8-bit machines, the ST, probably get it working on a PC and the Falcon, those platforms as well. So I think if you extend it and kind of get all those users together on that fan base, it could be worthwhile.
Also, some of the dentists might need one as well, because it was used on the older dentist machines, wasn't it, the case?
Yeah, just screw like a drill into the end of it, control it with a Jaguar. That'd be awesome. No, actually, that'd be terrifying, wouldn't it? Yeah. So if you want to find out more about that campaign, I will put a link in the show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, while we're talking about cool hardware as well, for computers, I think it's fair to say the Gotek was a bit of a revolution a few years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the Gotek was kind of a floppy drive replacement, and this was really cool because you could flash it with this custom firmware, put it on anything, but a lot of people would like mash up their cases when they put it in there. And I've seen quite a lot of uses for it, actually. A lot of people have started using them on the old music samplers that used to use floppy disk drives.
Yeah, a lot of keyboards did, didn't they, and stuff?
Yeah. So they're now replacing them, and you're actually getting kind of built music samplers with Goteks in them.
Well, like you said, though, the thing about it is, it was the same size as an original 3.5-inch floppy drive.
Yeah.
And a lot of systems back then were like, they had kind of custom drives, didn't they? That didn't quite fit.
Weren't they like the 3.5-inch ones would be for big desktops?
Yeah.
And then you'd have a smaller kind of floppy standard for like the little table styles ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So think about it is, though, like you said, people used to get like, God, I've seen some horrible mods, especially in the Amiga forum.
Oh, yeah. There's just people going at it with a drill and stuff like that.
Hacksaws and everything, yeah. Well, you don't have to do that anymore because there is actually a micro Gotek drive now. Now, these pictures, it looks tiny. I mean, there is actually a website and a forum that you can go onto. And they're selling these on Sell My Retro at the moment. And these are tiny. They are 47 by 46 millimeters.
Wow.
So these can actually just plug straight into the floppy drive header on the motherboard.
Jeez, that's awesome, that is. So you can just still do exactly what you could before, put your USB in, load different sectors.
Yeah.
Wow.
And even, I mean, I was thinking this, because it's so small, it might not work with every system, but you remember like old PCs, you could have an A drive and a B drive if you had like a ribbon cable with 2 connectors on. So you might be able to have one of these micro Goteks and keep the floppy drive in there as well.
Well, I'm also looking that they have socket stuff for OLED displays and buzzers and stuff like that. So basically, you could have one of those displays on your old school machine that will tell you exactly what the track is. And awesome.
Yeah, and you can have the Gotek literally mounted behind it because it's so small, this new one. And it's only 25 quid.
That's so cheap.
So,
yeah, I'm looking at a picture of it. It's absolutely tiny.
Yeah. And I think, of course, a lot of those old cases were pretty cramped anyway, weren't they?
Yeah.
And what I've never
hot.
Yeah, they did get very warm. But I'm thinking, if you could actually run one of these in parallel with a floppy drive as well, you could have all the benefits of everything then, really. Because, I mean, I've got a Gotek in my Atari STE, and I kind of do miss having the floppy drive in there now and then. If you could have both, it'd be even better, I think.
Yeah.
So that's a good little solution. And for 25 quid, I mean, if you've never used a Gotek before, essentially it's flash memory, isn't it? We can put a USB stick onto it and you just download all the floppy disk images.
Isn't that cheaper than the actual original Gotek, it seems to be?
Yeah, I think they're about 40 quid, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's less components, I guess. It's a lot smaller. And you haven't got the big plastic case around it as well. So, yeah, the micro Gotek has arrived. So
we'll have a link in the description there.
Yeah, theretrohour.com. Now, we were both fans of adventure games, weren't we? The LucasArts games.
Oh, yeah, absolutely loved them.
Do you like Day of the Tentacle?
I love Day of the Tentacle, and I was very sad when it didn't come out on the Amiga. As with Tim Schafer, who's like one of the best adventure game guys in the world, and he was great with his point and clicks. And it had some great animation and some great voice acting in it as well. And it was a sequel to Maniac Mansion.
Yeah, the Ron Gilbert game.
Yeah, which was kind of the original Scum Scum Engine original game.
That's where it started, isn't it? On that game, yeah. And the graphics on it always looked amazing as well, I thought.
Yeah, they were good, yeah. It depends what you run it on. I used to run it on some slow things. But they always did. The animation was that total kind of no CGI. It was just, painted and hand-drawn, yeah, beautifully.
It looked like very much like a cartoon, didn't it? The quality of it. Because when you look at stuff like Monkey Island, there were tiny little sprites and they were pixelated, weren't they?
Well, it was just before Full Throttle as well, and Full Throttle was when they took it into the kind of next level. But this one, they had the old interface, and they also had a lot of the old kind of jokey solutions to things,
That was always a thing, though, wasn't it, with the old LucasArts games? It was that humour that was in there.
Yeah.
They were just, hilarious. And it did get an HD upgrade, didn't it? Was it last summer?
And Dave Grossman was involved as well. It was really big. They were the co-creators,
Well, the thing about this is, if you can't get enough of Dave the Tentacle, there is a new game now called Return of the Tentacle Prologue. Thing about it is, this is a complete fan-made project.
So this is a prologue. So this is in between Maniac Mansion and Day of the Tentacle, I'm guessing.
I've downloaded it. I've not actually played it much yet. I watched a bit of the introduction. I mean, there is a trailer for it, so have a little listen to this. See what you think of the quality of the voice acting on it.
Who could that be at this hour? Ah, the postman.
Wow,
maybe it's a reply to my ad from the Lonely Hearts column.
Very well done, isn't it?
That is a really good impression if they've got it.
It's so faithful to the original version.
Flyer for cheap mail order jewels.
You can tell it's someone else, but it does sound awesome, amazingly good.
And I can't believe how good it looks for a fan project. I mean, it looks like it could have been an official sequel. I mean, it is free as well. So you can download this. I mean, I got the PC
platforms?
Version. I think it's on PC, Mac, and Linux.
Okay.
So it's about 1 gigabyte to download. Not too big, but yeah, like I said, I just before the show, I give it a download and tried out the first. Literally, watch it opening introduction on it. Blown away by the quality of the animation, and it just does capture that original LucasArts adventure feeling, I think.
Totally, and that's like it's like a lost genre, apart from the most recent title that they did that I've absolutely forgotten. What was it?
Thimbleweed Park.
Yes, that was it, yeah. It was like a forgotten genre, apart from that, which kind of took me directly back to there. And this is very similar to Thimbleweed Park as well.
Well, the plot of this one is Purple Tentacle is back and tries to conquer the world and enslave humanity once more. The three friends, Bernard, Laverne and Hoagie, make their way back to the mansion of the mad scientist Dr. Fred, using time travel to help them save the world. So
time travel, that explains it.
The prologue time, there you go. So, again, I mean, I looked at it and I thought, how are these guys not going to get sued? Which was my initial thing, and I hope they don't.
I hope they don't, because it sounds like they've put a lot of heart into that game.
Yeah, and again, for fans of that genre, LucasArts are not doing anything with that these days.
No.
So you may as well let it back into the hands of the fans. In the meantime, you've also seen there's been a petition to get Ron Gilbert his original rights back to Monkey Island.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I don't think Disney care. Honestly, I know Disney, and they sued people for doing the local council did a kind of Mickey Mouse flower display, and they sued them for that. So honestly, I think it's not worth it. It's Disney.
Yeah, we've got a lot of people tweeting us a link. And I mean, I did sign it. I think we did mention it about 6 months ago, didn't we, when the story first broke? But I mean, I'd love to see Ron doing more Monkey Island games. I mean, if not, you might just have to swap up the names of the characters or get these guys involved.
Monkey Islands.
Exactly, yeah. Now, before we get into our special guest, Jake Simpson, let's talk about a game from back in the day that never saw the light of day. Were you a fan of Battletoads?
I wasn't really. I had an awful version for the CD32 where you couldn't actually punch in it. Well, you could, but it was really hard to do.
Was that the controllers? Was just
it was just a really bad port. I heard it was a good game though. Like
very hard game.
Lots of my friends used to be into it. Yeah.
That's the one thing I always hear about how difficult the game was and how unfair it was. And obviously Rare were behind it. You know, we're close to the guys at Rare. We've had a lot of them on the show before. But it turns out they actually did a version of Battletoads called Super Battletoads for the Game Boy that was 100% finished but never got released, which is a bit weird. The thing about this project is it was apparently around the same time that Donkey Kong Land was getting made, and they'd finished this game. It was ready to get released, and then a lot of the guys from Rare just kind of forgotten about it completely and thought, oh, this must have never existed then. But, obviously in 2015, the Rare Replay compilation came out. Well, apparently when we go through the archives, they found it on an old floppy disk.
And they're like, why didn't we release this?
Well, they booted it up, and apparently, they're all sitting there bated breath. Is it going to work? Is it going to work? And it loaded up first time, apparently.
Wow.
So it is 100%. They couldn't see any bugs in the game. Apparently, it's a fully working Battletoads on the Game Boy. The only thing about it is, they don't reckon we're ever going to see the light of day because obviously there's copyright issues as well. But also, apparently, they were playing on it. And the guys that were behind the game tried to play it through, and apparently it was so hard. They just kept dying all the time. And they kept tweaking it to try and make the game harder and harder because they knew it inside out. But he said playing it 20 years on, it's just rock hard. They couldn't get anywhere in the game. So
they were noobs again.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think you often found that, and a few people are making a point on this article here on Nintendo Life, that really games back in the day were designed to be difficult because if they were easy, you complete the game in like an hour.
Yeah, but also they didn't have playtesting. They didn't have like a group full of people that would go, "Oh, this is too hard," and sometimes it would be the programmer doing it, and he knew exactly what was going on, so he could pull off all the moves that nobody could. And then he released a game, and they're like, "This is impossibly hard."
That happened a lot, didn't it?
Yeah,
because they'd think, like you said, 'cause they played it inside out for like about 6 months. They think, "Oh, it's too easy." And they're at the difficulty level. But when we're like us 10-year-olds trying to play it at home, it's like, got no chance with it. But also I think it's kind of, the fact that some games made it intentionally difficult was probably a hangover from the arcade that, feed another 10p in just to give it another try.
Totally.
Probably a lot of that with it as well. I think it's cool that there is this unreleased game lurking around there, and apparently they've got it running on a Game Boy emulator. And you never know, maybe someone might leak it onto the internet at some point. Stranger things have happened.
Yeah, stranger things have happened. So that would be great. And they're saying apparently no bugs were there, so it's even bug free.
Well, apparently it was ready to go, but I mean, I can understand I've got a feeling to get a game released by Nintendo, you had to have something like 100,000 cartridges minimum order.
Okay.
And if they'd had like a couple of flops on the hand before that and they weren't convinced it was going to be a big hit, you can see why maybe it's not like today you can put a game on the internet.
And also the rights are like for Battletoads and stuff. Because I was watching Ready Player One and the guy's leading the charge with the Battletoads, so I could see a lot of trademarks and stuff like that.
That's the thing today. I mean, you can put a game up on Steam and you pay for your development, but kind of distribution costs you nothing now, does it? But if you're printing like 100,000 cartridges, putting them out in the shops and it flops, you lost millions, haven't you, there? Totally. So I can see why they were a bit more cautious back then, but we'll keep an eye out for that. If any copies do surface, we'll be the first to let you know. Right then, well, thank you for checking out the news this week. We will have more in next week's podcast that will be out on Friday. And right now it's time to reminisce about the days of Midway, Williams, Raven Software, with this week's special guest, Jake Simpson.
Mortal Kombat!
Listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for the main event. Let's welcome on this week's very special guest. Welcome to the show, Jake Simpson.
Hello.
Now, we are calling you from America, but that accent's definitely not American.
Well done. Most Americans, I tell them, this is how we talk in Michigan. I'm from Kent. I'm from a little town called Herne Bay. Just north of Canterbury. I spent way too many years there, but I discovered where the railway station was, so I left.
But we were saying before we did the interview, you still got your creature comforts out there. You've got a proper builder's tee on the go.
Absolutely.
So let's go back to like the start then, Jake. I mean, what was it that originally started your journey with computers and video games?
Oh, so many years ago. I had a woodworking teacher at school, the Geoffrey Chaucer School, many years ago, and he was a closet computer nerd, and he challenged myself and my friends to write something on the computers of the day, the RML 380Z, these enormous, great steel chassised computers there were CPM computers that you had to load the basic operating system off a disk. And I wrote a page-by-page thing in BASIC that demonstrated how radio-controlled cars worked. And it was purely done because he promised us a box of Mars bars, which he never delivered on, by the way. And that started my interest with computers. And then the Commodore 64 came along. I mean, I had many different home computers because I worked part-time in a computer store in Canterbury, place Kent Microsystems. And I eventually settled on the Commodore 64 as being my sort of target of joy. I wrote some basic stuff and then even got a basic compiler that sped it up, and then moved into assembly language programming. And it was really fueled by Jeff Minter over at Llamasoft. I remember the very first games I pirated being Attack of the Mutant Camels. And I was, at the time, too poor to actually pay for a joystick. So I learned to play Attack of the Mutant Camels on the keyboard.
Oh, wow.
And I remember going to the Commodore show and meeting Jeff Minter for the very first time. And I was playing at AMC. He had basically computers arranged outside of his little booth. And I was playing AMC on the keyboard. And he came out and looked at me and went, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm playing it on a keyboard because I don't have a mouse. Don't have a joystick." And he came out and challenged me to a game where he played on the joystick and I played on the keyboard. And I beat him. And that started a bit of a weird sort of friendship. Now I look back on it, I'm not sure it was entirely appropriate because I persuaded him to let me come and visit him in Tadley in Hants, where his office space was. He had a big building that was built on the side, big room built on the side of his parents' house. And I used to go and visit him, and he would show me the latest games like Sheep in Space and things like that. And I'd play him a bit and we'd talk. He had arcade machines physically in his little office space. He had a Star Wars arcade machine. And he was so completely master of his own destiny. He knew what he wanted to do, and he had oodles of talent. I mean, the guy did all of his own artwork as well. And for that, I will hate him forever. But the guy's just amazing. And I looked up to him and thought, that's what I want to be. He was the idol. And that's where I started. I wrote some stuff on the Commodore 64. And I ended up working for a small company called Linsoft. That's right. And we did ports for EA mostly. We did a port of PHM Pegasus from the Commodore 64 onto the Spectrum and the Amstrad. At the time, we did a port of both Archon games, Archon and Archon 2 Adept, which was really interesting. And I still think that those games are ripe for a revisit now. Actually, if EA still owns the IP for those, but those are really ripe for a game now. All with none of them with source code. We had to just play the game and work out what was going on from it.
You mentioned the C64 there was your main platform. I mean, did you kind of have your sights on like the BBC Micro as well? Because I know that was quite a desirable machine back then, wasn't it?
The BBC was a much better machine. We had a lot of those at school, but I could see the writing on the wall. Even then I could see like the C64 was cheaper. And there was so much product from America at the time, summer games and the sports games and all those joystick wagglers that destroyed your joysticks, those kinds of things. And the software for the BBC Micro, though it was better, you had Elite and you had Planetoid, which was the Defender ripoff that was just so good. And the games were actually better on the BBC Micro, but the C64 was going to have way greater market penetration if purely based on price, if nothing else. It had sprites, things like that, and much better sound chip. The BBC Micro, because it was in schools, and we always looked at it as this is a more serious machine. The C64 was the games machine, as it were, and that's why I targeted that more than the BBC Micro. Even then, at the time, there was always the fierce pitch battles between the Spectrum owners, or the Sinclair Rectum owners, as we used to call them. He says, showing his allegiance.
I'm dreading the tweets already.
Yeah, right. Oh, the Spectrum was an absolutely wonderful machine. And now I look back on it, when you're 12 years old, of course, you've got to have your battle standard and you've got to, you're playing to the faithful. But now I look back on it, what Sinclair did for home computing in general. I mean, he pretty much single-handedly kickstarted the entire British game development environment. There's no doubt about it. So, yeah, what he did, whatever accolades are being laid at his door, they're not enough. The guy was just outstanding. The QL, the Quantum Heap, was less impressive, but the Spectrums were really, really, the ZX81 and the Spectrums were just amazing machines for the time. But, yeah, I found the 6502 easier to use than the ZX80. Indexing modes on the 6502 were just simpler to understand, I think. But anyway,
what were the first commercial products you kind of got paid for? Projects getting involved.
I wrote a sort of a synth, a very very light-ended synth thing, which was compiled under BASIC. That was sold under K Microsystems. We had the very first thing I would have been paid for was a really really good port of Arkanoid. And that's actually how I came to the attention of Linsoft. I had a port of Arkanoid, which was full screen width. The one that Ocean actually released was not full screen width because of the whole page thing. The Commodore 64's resolution was 320, and of course, when you're using with an 8-bit computer that only goes up to 0 to 256, they only use part of the screen. Mine used the full screen. It was a significantly better version than the one that actually got released. But we dealt with Firebird, the British Telecom brand, and Firebird looked at Arkanoid and looked at the fact that Ocean had already got the rights, or generic rights, I think, to Taito's product at the time. But there was a lawsuit going on between Taito and Atari because, Arkanoid is very, very obviously a rip-off of
Breakout?
Yeah, Breakout, right. And they, took Breakout and obviously went in new directions with it, more power to them, but it was obviously a rip-out. And this was the time, of course, that Apple was suing the crap out of Windows because of look and feel. So there was this lawsuit going on, and Firebird approached Atari and said, hey, if you win, can we do this? And Atari said, yeah, sure, no problem. We're going to win anyway. It's going to be no problem. So we went away and we kept developing it. And then, lo and behold, Atari lost. Nobody saw that coming. Everybody thought that Taito was going to lose, but they didn't. And so our product got cancelled, and the Ocean one got put out there. And the Ocean one was a pretty good port of an arcade game, but it was technologically very inferior to what we were doing. We even, in our product, even had a layout editor that was built into the game where you could generate your own. It was a separate product, actually, but it was a basic product that enabled you to lay out the levels for Arkanoid using a little basic product, and it would print out what the data files were that you needed to then put into the game in order to actually be able to generate your own levels. So we were way ahead of the curve at the time, but it got cancelled.
Well, you talked about the drama there with Atari. I mean, the industry then wasn't exactly free from drama. I know you had a bit of a fallout with Domark at one point as well.
Oh, yeah.
What happened there?
Dominic and Strachan and Mark Wheatley. Oh my goodness me, those two guys were like, oil and water. They were just awful people to deal with. I mean, they just were. So we got approached by Domark. Domark had purchased the rights to all of the James Bond titles, and we at Linsoft actually we designed Live and Let Die, and so we went away and we started working on it. I mean, it was basically a boat racing game because if you Live and Let Die, a large portion of the game is that boat race, along the canals in the deep South of America. And we designed it and built it. And we started building both the Spectrum, the Commodore 64, the Amstrad, and the Atari ST and Amiga versions of it. We had all 5 of them going at once. And we were, chugging along, making progress. And then Domark switched our project manager on us to some other guy. This other guy had come from a software house. He'd been a developer, a sort of project manager at a software house that did Bumping Buggies, which was another arcade game. And there was a similarity to the visuals of what we were going for. Before we knew it, our project had been cancelled. And this guy had taken our product that we developed and designed to the original software house that he used to use. He was working for, rather, to do the port. And I'm fairly sure, I can't say for certain, but I'm fairly sure there was a backhander involved at some point. Anyway, so we lost the product, and effectively that killed actually Linsoft entirely. It was very frustrating, and I remember getting into a really knockdown, drag-out shouting match at the Commodore show when this product was launched, because I went to the Domark and I saw it and I was playing it and I went, it's just bullshit. We were so close. You killed our software studio for what? And I got into a bit of a row with Dominic. It was either Dominic Wheatley or Mark Strachan, I don't remember which. And that was the end of my involvement in video games for a little while. What had happened with Arkanoid and then this, it was like, it's kind of done. So I went away back to Hatfield Poly to finish off my degree, and then went out to be a mainframe programmer, which was writing COBOL. Can you believe it? Oh my God, I had to wear a tie. What was I thinking?
Was that when you decided to kind of move to America? And
yes.
Why did you decide to move? Was it Midway or Williams?
No. At the time, it was pure opportunity. I was working for British Telecom International, and it became clear that the only way to progress in British BTI was for someone to die. So short of hiring a hitman, there was no way I was going to move up. I was working for a really, really smart engineer who was much better than I was, and he couldn't move up either. So if he couldn't, there was no chance for me. So I did about 18 months there. I started looking around for a new job, and I saw an advert for consultants out in the States, and I thought, I wonder if I could even get it. I wonder if even, I was even any chance I could do it. And the next thing I know, I've got a British Airways ticket in my hand, I've got a visa stamp in my passport, and I'm going to Chicago. Wow. So I spent about 6 months, 8 months, no, about 9 months, I think, working for this consultancy out in Chicago. I discovered that the contract that you sign in England is very different from the one you have to sign. They try and get you to sign immediately after you get off the plane, because the one in England is not legal than the one, in America. So they get you to sign another one, and it's not quite the same. And then I found that I was being put into clients, and I was being charged at twice as much as the American consultants were, but I was actually earning 1/3 less. So they were pocketing the difference. And me being my father's son, I kind of had things to say about that. Yeah, that didn't go down well. So, but during the meanwhile, I had met my wife-to-be. So, to cut a long story short, I ended up marrying her. And of course, the moment I married her, I got a green card. And then I could work for anybody. And I had been at that point communicating with Midway. I'd actually reached out, and they weren't even Midway at that time. They were actually still Williams Bally Midway. They were Williams. And I went through a long interview process. I did 7 interviews, I think, because you had to interview with everybody in the video department at that point, because the products chopped and changed so much, you never knew who it was that you might end up working with. So you had to interview with everybody, and any one person could say no, and you were done. So I interviewed with everybody. I even had to get my mother, to send me out some discs from England, some Amiga discs from England, stuff that I'd been working on, to show them that I could write code. And, I just sit and do a programming test for an afternoon. It was involved, but I finally got the job, which was surprising. But
well, I mean, obviously then you were working for Williams, and they had some massive hits. I mean, they were a huge gaming company. I mean, what was it like to be in the center of all that and working there at that point?
God, it was like the Wild West. I mean, the teams were small. Teams were like 5 people, 2 engineers, 3 artists. I mean, Mortal Kombat, for example, there's 3 people. It was Ed Boon, John Tobias, and John Vogel. John Tobias was the visual guy who decided, and he wrote the backstory and did the visual style. John Vogel did all the backgrounds, and Boon did all the programming himself. The next one, they added a couple of artists for backgrounds, extra backgrounds for Mortal Kombat 2. But it was small, and there was almost no oversight. We were allowed to go for licenses. Terminator 2 was a good case in point. There were some great Terminator 2 stories. A great story would be, for example, they had no character designs for the future soldiers, because they hadn't shot any of that yet. When the movie hadn't shot any of that yet, when the game needed to start shooting some of their stuff, they had the script. They knew what was going to happen in Terminator 2. They weren't allowed to take the script off of the soundstage, though. They got to read it and then walk away, and that was it. But they had no idea of what the future soldiers were going to look like. So in the end, they couldn't wait. Schedules being what they were, they had to get the job done. So Jack Hager was the art director on that. Jack went to a local army surplus store and just bought a whole bunch of stuff, took it back to the office, laid it all out, sort of put together a basic kind of costume, took photographs of it, and sent that to Lightstorm, to James Cameron over at Lightstorm. Cameron apparently took a look at it and went, yeah, that's okay, and then sent it to his costume designer and said, that's what our future soldiers are going to look like in Terminator 2.
Oh, wow.
So that actually came from the video game. There was no fear of going for licenses. At one point, we actually had a game on the drawing boards I was involved in that was going to be a Highlander game, and it was going to be kind of a Mortal Kombat-y type fighting game, but with swords. And there were some clever moves where, like, if you were impaled on a sword, you'd actually pull yourself down onto the sword and then use yours to decapitate the guy who just impaled you, things like that. We actually had that on the drawing board, and we were just about ready to sign on the dotted line when some of our developers got cold feet, and so we sort of passed on it. But yeah, there was virtually no oversight. We got freedom to sort of build prototypes of anything we felt like. But there was this expectation of sales. I mean, Mortal Kombat came along and just smashed all the records out of the window. And then immediately after that came NBA Jam, which was a 4-player game. And it was just even more sales. the biggest problem was that because of the pressure to release more sequels as quickly as possible, you ended up cannibalizing your own sales. Like, for example, Mortal Kombat 3 sold half as many actual cabinets as Mortal Kombat 2 did, but it sold an awful lot more what are called kits. And so the idea is that with a kit, you sell a control panel, you sell the boards, and you sell the artwork, some sticker artwork, and a marquee. And the idea is that you cannibalize an existing cabinet that already exists, take out, replace the control panel and put some stickers on the side, put the marquee on top, replace the boards, and off you go. And that's what Mortal Kombat 3 started cannibalizing Mortal Kombat 1 cabinets that were already out there in the world. Anyway, it was an exciting time, though. There was a large degree of arrogance as well, though. I mean, we all had it because we were considering ourselves to be the best in the world. And there was those kinds of games, those arcade games, are what we call dip games. And that means you can dip in and out of it. An average game, the idea of an arcade game was that we were supposed to take a quarter, or take a credit, I should say, not a quarter, because there was a complete abstraction between what the actual value was and what operators could set it to be. You were supposed to take a credit every 45 seconds. That's how it was meant to be. That's what you were targeting. And it was much harder to do that with story-based games, things like Revolution X or Terminator 2, than it was with NBA Jam. NBA Jam had replay value because you were always playing against another person. Whereas once you bought your way all the way through Revolution X or Terminator 2, you'd seen it. There's no real reason to come back to it again. So there was a lot more turning towards those kinds of, person-on-person game. Midway, there was a hockey game they did. There was supposed to be a driving game. Then Cruising USA came along, and all of these are, head-to-head competition. One thing we did figure out, though, is that we could tell how successful a game was likely to be by how much bad language it generated from the developers. If you have people playing this game, I mean, the words that used to echo out of Boone's office would tell you, whether people are having a good time. Get the blah, 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 off my bridge, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, some of the abusive language that got handed out to each other was really, really heavy duty. And it's funny because it all tied in with what John Romero was talking about with Doom. He was pretty foul-mouthed when he was playing Deathmatch as well. And we used to use it as a barometer of how good is this game, how much do people want to play it, based on how much bad language they threw at each other.
Well, I remember for me, Mortal Kombat was one of my most vivid memories. I think I was about 11 when that game came out, seeing it in the arcades. And I think I was away at like Pontins or something when I first saw it. And just kids were crowding around it all night. And we'd never seen anything like that. The digitized characters in the game as well, and the blood. I mean, was that kind of Midway's golden egg when that franchise came out?
I'd say so, yeah. Ed had worked previously on a football game, and he wanted to do something with big sprites, and he had a Street Fighter II in his office, and he wanted to do a much, much faster version of Street Fighter II, because Street Fighter II it's a fairly slow game. It's a lot more strategic than MK is. MK was designed to be a button masher. Anyone could be successful, and you could just walk up, button mash, and the guy would do things, and the AI was so brain dead on the first few levels that you would be successful. So he had everything all combined inside of there. He had the success of a player playing it. You felt powerful. The sound stuff, the Dan Forden sound stuff was very meaty and juicy. It felt, when you had a good successful thump on somebody, it really felt good. I could tell you some other stories, but Ed would really kill me about what some of the audio actually in that game is, but I'm not going to go into that because that's just really bad news. So, yeah, Dan Fielding's toasty, and that's because he used to come into Ed's office and play it, and he would say things. And there was a whole bunch of other phrases that didn't make it into the game. I remember Eric Kincaid, another artist who worked on MK3, I think it was, and he was all about the boo every time he took somebody out. We were amazed though at some of the results or some of the commentary that came out from Mortal Kombat. I remember one distributor rang up Midway to ask if there was a rape scene in it, and we were sort of looking at each other, going, "It's a video game. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? I mean, that's just But then again, I suppose, yeah, it was pretty violent for what it was.
How did Midway kind of keep Mortal Kombat series fresh and, come up with new innovations? Because I remember there was still the finishing moves in the first one as well.
And babalities and friendship moves came in, didn't they?
Yeah, that came. The babalities came I think they were in 3 actually, and some of those actually came from just reading message boards and seeing what other people were saying. People claiming to have seen things that certainly were not in the game. I mean, error macro is just, but that was just code. That was a text message left in the code base because it was part of the compilation process. That's all it was. And then people were seeing this and going, "Oh, there's a new character called error macro." Well, no, there wasn't, but there was in the second one because they picked up on it and went, "Yeah, right, why not?" The noob Cybot, that's Boone and Tobias backwards. And some of it, like I said, the babalities and the animalities, they came purely from suggestions of seeing people talking about it. People saying they'd seen it. It wasn't there. So we thought, well, stick it in. Why not?
Well, I remember at school, I mean, you kind of fell into 2 camps. I guess whether you had a Mega Drive or a SNES, but was Street Fighter 2 seen as the main rival? So at school, it was always Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter 2.
No, Street Fighter 2. Although, I mean, I'll tell you a story about the original Mortal Monday. That was quite entertaining because, of course, Midway had made a big boob. They had sold the rights for all of their games to Acclaim to do ports for. It was a generic deal. It wasn't a very specific game by game. They just sold the rights for like the next 5 years to all of the games that Midway put out. And, of course, Mortal Kombat rolls along and Acclaim's rubbing their hands. They went away. They got this software house, I think it was Iguana, I think it was, I'm sure, to do a port. And they did not do a line-for-line port. What they did was they played the game and then tried to create their own version of it. And it was not good. And I remember Ed being very, very upset. And he would not give approval for this thing to be released. But in the meantime, Acclaim has gone away, spent millions on this whole Mortal Monday commercial. You remember the kid in the street in the, Mortal Kombat, all that. They spent a lot of money and they were all set to produce this and ready to go. And Ed would not release it. He would not sign his approval. They actually sent him a lawsuit on the Friday before the Mortal Monday to force him to actually sign approval so they could actually sell this game on the Monday. He was that unhappy with what was put out there in the world. The MK2, I think it was Probe that did that one. That was a line-for-line port, and everyone was much, much happier about that. But there was a lot of degree of frustration at Midway that the amount of earning potential that the individual developers could make was very, very limited because of this $5 million deal that Neil Nicastro had made with Acclaim for every game to go out there. The same with NBA Jam. There was a lot of frustration that it wasn't being done in-house, and yeah.
It's kind of funny looking back on it now because compared to what came later, I mean, you look at the latest Mortal Kombat game versus like the first couple. But I remember reading, so many reports about how violent the game was, and it did get a lot of that in the press. And it was one of the games that was responsible for age ratings coming in video games as well. I mean, did you kind of enjoy that at Midway? Did you kind of thrive upon it?
It wasn't something that the environment was so insular. It's very like Valve is now. People disappear into Valve and they don't come out again. They just stop talking to all their friends. It's a very weird little sort of echo chamber. And Midway was the same. We didn't really talk to external developers. We only hired one external developer from EA, and that didn't go down well. It didn't end well. It was very insular. We weren't really listening very much. Everyone was so wrapped up with how great they were because they worked for Midway in the first place. It was a huge, like I said, a huge degree of arrogance, really, that they weren't really looking at what the world was saying very much. We were just wrapped up in hey, can our next game make as much as the last one did? That's really what everyone was looking at.
Well, one thing we heard about, I'm a massive fan of 2000 AD, and one thing we heard about was a kind of side-scrolling Judge Dredd game that got cancelled.
It's out on MAME. If you get the ROMs are actually out on MAME. That was actually my first product, and there was people talking about doing it when I got there. And there was talk of this movie as well with Sylvester Stallone. And that was the first product. And we modeled it. It was modeled on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. We had a 4-player version of that sitting in our offices that we were playing. It was modeled on that. And we had some real problems with it because Neil Nicastro, there had been the success of Mortal Kombat. Neil Nicastro desperately, what he wanted was a side-scrolling Mortal Kombat. And he kept trying to make Judge Dredd a side-scrolling Mortal Kombat, and we had internal qualities. I remember John Spire saying to Neil Castro, "Look, Judge Dredd is not Bruce Lee. Judge Dredd is make my day. He's Clint Eastwood, right? He's not But we had to do this because that's not Neil told us to do. And so we had one side-scrolling level that was just punching, and then we had another one that had guns, and then we had intermediary levels with a shooting gallery, and then we also had a bike trace in there as well, which was top down. Looked very much like a really nice version of Spy Hunter. We had a wrestling level where we had Precious Mackenzie in there, and then we had the final levels where we judged death. And we actually used the same modeler that modeled Goro in Judge Dredd. Now, we put this thing out on test. We were not even remotely earning the same kind of money as NBA Jam or Mortal Kombat. And for some reason, the team just lost faith with it. We never actually released the full product, which is a shame. We really should have done. We never finished that last level. The last level was almost complete, but we never actually finished it and put it out there. And we really should have just put it out there. And like I said, there was only 4 arcade games that were ever actually made. I had one. Mine got destroyed years ago. And the other 3 guys had one. One of those guys, and I don't know which one, put his ROMs that he had in his machine into MAME. And you can actually download the Judge Dredd game in MAME. It's there.
I've got to have a try on that, definitely.
Yeah.
But those kind of games were big then. I mean, you had like Turtles and The Simpsons as well, so it kind of made sense that genre was going to be explored, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we should have released it, but it was a bad decision, and that was a wrong decision. But never mind, Well, hindsight's always 20/20.
Well, one big franchise that you did work on, it was a golden age of wrestling. Then I remember every kid at school was into it. WWF WrestleMania.
Yeah, WWF was great. We had so much fun with that, and we got all the wrestlers coming in when they came through Chicago. They would come into the offices and we'd shoot them, on the green screen or blue screen as it was then. And it was fascinating. We got to meet all these guys, and they were really interesting, funny guys. Doink the Clown and Lex Luger and all those people. I remember Yokozuna. That man was 400 pounds. He was huge. He would have for lunch, he would have like 4 chicken sandwiches. And when we went out, we went to this bar that was out by the airport that was a notorious wrestling. And he would, instead of having like, a vodka and tonic, he'd have a pint of it. I mean, there was no way he was going to survive with the strain on his heart. And of course he didn't. He died, relatively young of a heart attack, which is entirely unsurprising. But yeah, they were a nice bunch. They were fun. That game went through an awful lot of iterations, though. We couldn't figure out how to get the holding and breaking the holding stuff. We tried multiple different ways of trying that. But yeah, that was a lot of fun.
And they were like big stars back then as well, weren't they?
They were, yeah. It was a big deal to have that game. We had a lot of fun making that. I remember, working at 2:00 in the morning with Mark Trammell and trying to put these combos and put moves in and just getting animations from the animating guys from Sal DeVita and just putting them in as quickly as possible. Yeah. That was a lot of fun.
Did you ever have a wrestle in the office?
Well, it turns out, weirdly, the wrestlers themselves are on the road a lot. I don't think you guys understand the UK, because you sort of see WrestleMania and that was it. But they're doing shows every other night in each different cities, right? They're just traveling. It's like a traveling circus. There's usually 2 or 3 of these things on the go at any given time. So these wrestlers are just never home. Their phone bills were outrageous. And one of the wrestlers, Bret Hart, took a real shine to one of our art guys, Sal DeVita, who was, fairly well-muscled individual himself. And they would talk. I remember sitting in Sal's office, and he would sit there and spend an hour talking to Bret Hart, because Bret's just sitting in this hotel doing nothing. Couldn't go out because they were too famous. So you were captive in the hotel, and he would call Sal and just talk for an hour with him. It was quite a weird situation, really.
Well, having the game as well, I mean, I know it probably saved a lot of bruises in the playground, so we could play it on screen rather than doing it in the playground.
Yeah. Well, there's a video, actually, there's a promotion video, and I don't know, you might find it on YouTube if you look hard. There is a promotion video, which is really hilarious. It was shot internally, and it has Bret Hart in his full costume coming into Midway, and he puts a tie on. He's got his costume on, he puts a tie on and carries a briefcase, and he's sitting in the conference room describing what the game's going to be, and literally picks up one of the guys, who is actually Sal DeVita, picks up one of the guys in a suit and body slams him into the table. And then you see him sort of constructing the cabinets themselves and driving a forklift truck around and building the cabinets. And then he's sitting in my office at that time showing us in the code where things were wrong, and like, do referencing a null pointer, and somebody gets hit. Do you know what I mean? It was him doing all of the work to make a WrestleMania game, and it was absolutely hilarious.
If I can find that, I'll put that in the show notes. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you also did some work with the legendary Eugene Jarvis as well. How
Oh,
was that?
Eugene! Wow, Eugene is amazing. He is an absolute super genius. And the weird thing about it is when you meet him and the way he talks, you honestly, you look at him and you go, really, that's a super genius, really? And he's, yeah, that's really cool. And he's, he can be occasionally a bit raw as well, particularly when it comes to the opposite sex. But I remember sitting in my office and I was doing some friction equations, trying to work out, a simple way of doing some friction and doing ball overlap. So, like imagine playing pool, for example, where balls bounce off each other. And I'd spent 3 days going through equations. I had them all written up on the grease board, and I was just trying to work out the best way to put this into code. And somebody said to me, oh, yeah, Eugene did some of that. It's Mark Trammell actually said, yeah, Eugene did some of that on Smash TV. Yeah, he found a fast way to do it. You should go and talk to Eugene. So I wandered into Eugene's office and I said, hey, Eugene, how are you? How do you do this? And he went, oh, yeah. And he produced from memory all of the equations I just spent 3 days poring over in physics books. He produced them all from memory, drew them up on the grease board. He's like, yeah, you do this. You do it. I'm like, bloody hell. And then he goes, and all of that's crap. This is how you do it. You do percentage of overlap from the two origins, percentage of overlap, and you send them in the delta direction of where the overlap is multiplied by the amount of overlap. And I'm like, holy crap. And I went away and tried it that afternoon and it worked absolutely perfectly. And that was the moment I was like, oh my God, he really is the real deal. This guy is, yeah.
Well, as the 90s went on, you left Midway and moved to Raven Software.
Oh, yeah, can I jump in, dear? I want to tell a quick story here because I remember talking about Jeff Minter earlier on. Well, Jeff had, I'd still very vaguely sort of kept in touch with Jeff, and he had mentioned that he wanted to do a Robotronic type game. And he was actually going to be out at CES, which was in Chicago. So unbeknown to him, I'd said, oh, I'll meet you there. He was at the Atari booth. I think the Nuon was all the rage at the time. He was coding the very first Tempest version, I think, for Nuon at the time. And I said, I'll meet you there at this show. And I show up. And I'm like, hey, Jeff, how you doing? And he says, oh, hey, Jake, you've grown up a lot. Wow. And I said, somebody I want to introduce you to. And I introduced him to Eugene Jarvis because I brought Eugene with me. So I was able to introduce my hero to his hero. It was a really great cosmically circular afternoon. We spent the whole afternoon with Eugene. Literally, Jeff just dropped everything and went, I'll sort this, I'm leaving the booth. And he spent the afternoon with Eugene showing him what was going to be Smash USA or whatever it was, the driving game he worked on, Cruising USA. That's right. And it was one of the best days of my professional career, being able to take the guy that I admired innately and show him his guy.
Yeah, it must have been amazing to witness that.
It was great. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, moving on to Raven.
Why the move then?
Well, there was several reasons. The project I was working on, Carnival, I didn't really believe in it that much. Added to which I could see the writing on the wall. When I joined Midway, there were over 6,000 arcades in the USA. 4 or 5 years later, there were 2,500, and we were selling more and more to what are called street locations, which is things like the reception area, the lobby of a movie theater or a 7-Eleven or something like that. And we were selling less and less woods, less and less cabinets, because there were so many cabinets out there. You were just, you were selling kits. I could see the writing on the wall. You could see the consoles. The PlayStation 1 had come out, and that was a powerhouse. That had power comparable to some of the stuff that we had our hands on in the arcade. The things that we were able to hold on to were control mechanisms. You can't get the steering wheel kind of environment that Cruising USA had on the home consoles, at least not then anyway. I could see the writing on the wall. I knew arcades were going, and Midway in Chicago had no interest in dealing with the consoles. Everyone was still in the arcade set. They bought a studio in San Diego to do the ports of arcade games because the Acclaim deal had run out. I don't know. It was just this very much an attitude of this is going to go on forever, and I could see it wasn't. And we were looking at things like Doom and Quake and how great they were, and I wanted to work on first-person shooters. And Raven was 2 hours away, so why not? I went to Raven and had a really good time. I got to work on the first-person shooter games that I really was enjoying playing at the time. So,
well, as you said, kind of first-person shooters, they ruled the world in the 90s. And
they certainly did, yeah.
Moving on from that, kind of Mortal Kombat and the fighting games, you must have kind of seen this as the new place to be.
It was, and I was lucky. I mean, I walked out of the golden age of Midway and walked into the golden age at Raven, and I don't think that had anything to do with me. That was purely serendipitous timing on my part. There's no question about that. Nothing to do with me. But I got to work on Heretic 2. That was a project that they just starting as I got there. We did that in 9 months from start to finish with a crew of about 30. We were really, really happy with that game, and then we released it, and we came out 3 days before Half-Life, which was a year late, by the way. It's like, oh, that's nice. We got completely steamrolled by Valve, which is a shame, but never mind. I think that I would say, for my purposes, though, the Heretic 2 was probably the best development experience of my life to date. It was just tremendous. Everybody was rowing in the same direction. Everybody knew what we were making. Everybody had their heads down. We were just plowing ahead. We were using the Quake 2 engine. It was a great experience. I made friends there that I will still visit today. In fact, funny enough, on Thursday I'm going to Las Vegas to meet up with friends who are still at Raven and some that have moved on to Epic and other places. We have an annual reunion. That's the kind of friends that I made at that time. So Raven was absolutely a powerhouse of talent. There's no question about it.
Well, with everybody kind of using Unity and Unreal Engine and stuff now, they kind of forget how important the Quake engine really was. And all the mods coming out. And did you have any crazy favourite mods or anything like that?
Well, my favourite mod was always Rocket. Oh God, what was it called?
Oh, rocket jumping.
It was but it was a particular mod that was worked on by a team in England, and they went on to become Splash Damage. Paul, I can't think of his name. There's a story there where at the time there was a huge internal rivalry between Raven and Grey Matter at Activision. They were both Activision studios, and there was this huge internal rivalry. And I remember going to QuakeCon, and I was told by Brian Raffel that I had to try and recruit these guys to work with Raven because he didn't want them to go and work with Grey Matter. And I got there and I talked to them for about 10 minutes, and it was clear that they weren't going to work for anybody. They were their own group. Paul Wedgwood, that's his name, right? And I remember saying to Paul, right, well, I've done my bit for Raven then. You're not going to work for us. That's fine. Now, here's what you should do. Go away and form your own company and get id Software to pay for it, because they're desperate to have a professional team come out of the mod environment, because then it really validates their engine, which is exactly what was happening at the time. And that's exactly what they did. And they became Splash Damage, and Splash Damage has had a fair degree of success, and they've just sold themselves, I think, to a Chinese company for £45 million. So I think Paul did okay, you know?
I mean, getting back to Heretic 2, I was a big fan of the original, Heretic and Hexen. They were great games. Mm-hmm. When you're working on the sequel, I mean, what were you trying to improve over the original game? Well,
that was an interesting thing, because at the time, John Romero was just still, I think, at id, and he was the original producer, because they were actually id games. Heretic and Hexen, even though they were made by Raven, they were actually produced by id. And I remember John Romero had a plan for 3 different games. There was supposed to be Heretic, Hexen, and Hecatomb was supposed to be the third one. And we did Hexen 2, I know, and then there was supposed to be a third game called Hecatomb, and that never actually materialized. And John had left, and there was a strong desire. I mean, all of the Raven were very, very much fantasy guys. They were really big into that. And so the urge was to go down this path of having a third-person game that was mostly melee, and that's really what they wanted to do. And it's funny because a whole bunch of people from Raven had split off just before I got there. The original Heretic team, actually, in fact, had split off to form Human Head Studios, and they were across town. There's a fair bit of bad blood between the principals of those 2 studios for quite some time, because the guys at Raven had felt very much like, you only exist because we allowed you to work on this product, and this is how you repay us, kind of thing. A lot of that's mellowed now, but at the time there was, But I walked into the middle of it, not really understanding the political landscape, and I was friends with both sets, and it was torturous times at the time. I remember being summoned into various people's offices and told to stop talking about the guys from Human Head because they were perceived as persona non grata. But anyway, yeah, the Heretic was really it was their big fantasy play. That's what they wanted to do.
Well, I imagine Raven must have worked very closely with id Software then.
Yeah. When we were working on Star Trek Elite Force, for example, we were working off a pre-release version of the Quake 3 engine. And we actually had directly access to their source safe repository. And we were the only studio that could actually fix things inside of the engine. And id would take our fixes just completely and verbatim. For example, like one of the things about Quake 3 at the time that everyone was talking about was the NURB rendering, where you could get these big tubes, these very fleshy looking tubes, because it had specular values on it. So these very fleshy looking tubes that could pulse and all the rest of it inside the engine. Do you remember that?
Yeah, the plasma kind of tubes.
Yeah, I remember. They were defined using NURBs, and then there was a bit of complicated code that turned that into vertex arrays and then rendered them, which was great. But physics didn't work on them. You couldn't put them on the floor and then have characters run around on them because the mesh was generated from a NURB. The math didn't work. So Carmack's response to that, it not working, was to basically tell his people, don't put these things on the floor, only ever put them on the walls and the ceiling, and that way you can't walk on them. So they never actually fixed the physics on it, because he was, Carmack is very much a pragmatist. So he basically said, well, we're not going to spend the time to fix this. We're not going to bother. So, and because id Software is a engineering driven, or at least it was then, an engineering driven studio, Carmack could afford to say these things and make it stick. But when you take that engine to an artist-driven studio like Raven was, Brian Raffel was originally a level designer. He's very much a man with a keen eye to what the visuals look like in the art. He was very much that the attitude there was, well, this should work, and if it doesn't, make it work. So we had to go in and fix a lot of the things that it didn't fix, because it was just saying, well, don't do that then. We didn't have the power to say, don't do that then at Raven, so we had to fix it. So there was a lot of that going on. We fixed their sound system. In fact, I dropped in the 3D sound system that they took verbatim as well. There's lots of small little fixes that we put into place, but it was, most of it was 99.9% was Carmack and his absolute genius at architecture. There's nobody I've ever seen who does architecture as well as Carmack does.
Well, you've worked on tons of titles over the last years. We could go on for hours about this, but one title I'd like to talk about would be Soldier of Fortune, because you mentioned you mentioned Half-Life being a changing point. Soldier of Fortune had a very kind of not similar, but a story-led idea, and the training in it was very good. I kind of loved the way that it set up that game.
Well, Soldier of Fortune started life actually as Castle Wolfenstein. Raven had put together a Castle Wolfenstein demo for id Software, and we were hoping for them to grant us the license, just like we did Heretic and Hexen. They were going to grant. The idea was to get them to grant us a license to actually develop a Castle Wolfenstein game, and we presented them with the demo. And the demo was great. It had a lot of the building destruction and stuff like that in it that Soldier of Fortune ended up having. And it went, oh, yeah, this is terrific. This is great. We love this. We love this. This is terrific. And then handed the license to Grey Matter and said, hey, look, Raven's done this. Isn't it great? Can you make it better? And that was the genesis of the whole feud between Grey Matter and Raven in the first place, to be honest with you. But we're left with this demo that we put together, and we're like, well, what do we do with it? And we talked to Activision, and Activision said, well, we've got this one license that we don't really know what to do with. Do you think it would fit? And we were like, what's that? And they said Soldier of Fortune. And we were like, because remember, Soldier of Fortune is a magazine. It's for wannabe mercenaries, and it does reviews of guns and all the rest of it. We sort of looked at it and went, well, maybe it'll fit. I don't know. We ended up talking to the publishers, and the publishers said, hey, you need a consultant. And we got this guy, John Mullins. John came to visit us, and he was fascinating. I mean, this guy had lived the life and done the things. And frankly, if 50% of the or 25% of the stories that he tells are actually real, then man, this man has lived life. And I discovered that most of the stories were actually real because I ended up going to the Soldier of Fortune convention in Las Vegas to demo the game. And I got to meet a whole bunch of his friends and associates and ex-SAS people and Green Berets and all the rest of it, and SEALs, all people that he knew. And they would sit around and talk about these stories that we'd gotten hints of And they would flesh in all the details. And it was like, oh, my God, that's real. Holy crap, John was telling me stories about how he had one mission he was on where he was protecting someone's kid, and it all fell apart. And he had to walk into Jerusalem with a broken neck, with a towel wrapped around his head. And I'm like, yeah, that's not true. That's not real. But no, talking to some of these other guys who were involved in the action, it was like, wow, this is real. Anyway, so John gave us all sorts of hints and just like what the sound of the tink 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 of bullets casings sound like when you're in combat, things like that. And that's where a lot of Soldier of Fortune came from, was his advice. And we just went hog wild with it. It was all very ridiculous and out over the top, and blood spurts everywhere. And we had the Smith & Wesson dance when you got shot with a machine pistol. Yeah. It was all very over the top. And I remember at the time, Senator Joe Lieberman over here in the States complaining very, very bitterly about violence in video games. And of course, the two games that he actually picked on and had a right go about was Mortal Kombat and Soldier of Fortune. And I am the only man on earth who worked on both.
There's a theme.
Public enemy number one.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, I mean, we do generally say on this show, we are the Retro Hour. Generally, the year 2000-ish is kind of our cut-off point. But we couldn't wind up this conversation, Jake, without letting Ravi ask about The Sims, because he's such a big fan of The Sims.
The Sims.
Oh, yeah.
That was I went from Raven to EA, mainly because I was looking to be trained. One of the things about Raven is that there's not a lot of training in terms of, if you want to become a manager, they'll make you a manager, but you don't have any clue how to do it. And so I wanted to go somewhere that would actually train me. Plus, I wanted to build something rather than blow stuff up. Remember, I've been working on Mortal Kombat and blowing up stuff up for many, many years, and I wanted to work on something that was actually a construction kind of environment. So anyway, yeah, so ask your questions, dude.
Yeah, I was just a massive fan of the game. And what was it kind of like working with Will Wright and the whole Maxis
Will's
crew?
another genius. Will is the smartest man alive I know, who can point out to you your flaws in your argument without talking down to you and making you feel stupid. I mean, you still end up feeling stupid because the guy is just such a massive intellect. But still, I remember calling him in on one of the things I was going to change on Sims 2. And I went through the presentation of what I was going to do and what I was going to do it. And at the end of it, he went, yeah, that makes sense. He said, but what are you going to do about blah, blah, blah? And it's this one thing that, of course, I haven't considered and covered. And I'm like, get back to you on that one. You walk out feeling like 4 feet tall, because the guy, he's really the real deal as well. Another incredibly smart individual.
And it's great that he's kind of had a vision since the original SimCity to kind of, this full 3D environment. It's kind of like his whole sim idea has gone.
Well, hold on. Let's talk about this sim idea, because sim idea isn't actually his.
Well, sim brick.
so
rock,
what happened was, the original game of The Sims was called Dollhouse, and it was purely architectural. It was actually on a Mac too. It wasn't on a PC. It was on a Mac. It was called Dollhouse, and it was purely architectural. It was you just built environments, and the Sims were introduced into the environment to judge your architecture, the way that you built a house. They were designed to walk around the house and look at what you've done, and then they would give you their judgment on it. That's what the Sims were originally for. And then it became clear that, you had to direct the Sims' attention to certain things, because they weren't like, if you put in a nice arch or something, they were ignoring it. So you wanted to highlight the arch and get the Sims to go over there and look at it. And slowly, all of a sudden, it became so much more fun to play with the Sims than it did to actually build the thing in the first place. And that's when it swapped from becoming a Dollhouse to the Sims, and it swapped across to a PC product. And there was also an awful lot of women designers on the team. There was actually 50% women on the Sims original design team. And their impact was just amazing in terms of the things that they wanted to do, and the whole social interaction environment system was originally generated by women, but Will took it and ran with it and designed it, but it was originally pushed by some of the female designers on the team in the first place.
Well, when I was doing a bit of research for our chat tonight, Jake, I did read a quote from you back in 1999, which I'm sure you can't remember. But in 99, you said that you imagine what the future would be like in 20 years. And you said by then, we'll have moved beyond virtual reality glasses and gloves and that kind of technology. And it'll be more like the movie Strange Days, where we'll all end up kind of in that world. I mean, are you disappointed that we haven't quite reached that yet?
Yeah, a little bit. The problem, I think AR is really where it's going to end up going. VR is a stepping stone in the direction of AR. A lot of the problems that AR has to solve, are the same problems that VR has to solve. But AR has to solve even more. Trying to get the lighting right for your immediate environment, for example, is a big thing. VR, I think, is fascinating, but I think we've hit a niche in terms of it. The problem is it's been released too early because it's too expensive. The friction to actually setting up a VR headset right now is too great. It's expensive. You're spending $400 or $500 just on the headset, and then you've got to have a PC with a 1080 graphics card in it to run it. You're looking at things like the Rift, and you have to make sure you've got USB 3 ports that actually have sufficient speed to run it. There's just too much friction for it. And the rendering demands on it for 90 frames per second on each eye is staggering too. But VR has a much, much greater immersive experience because of the fact that you are so very visually there. We used it on Ready Player One to a huge success on the stage of Ready Player One. When we were shooting the movie, we used a lot of VR stuff. I think, I'd like to believe that we're still on the trajectory that I spoke about. It's more 50 years than 20 years. The technology in Moore's Law just hasn't caught up with the requirements that are necessary. I don't think VR is going to go away. I think it's here to stay. I think it's a niche product, though, at this current time. And until it's a £200, impulse buy where you can buy your glasses and they're still going to last all day, and you've got the mixture of Yelp and Facebook and Google Maps all mixed together inside of this this AR experience, we're not really going to see what it really could be. And we're still 20 years off that, at least.
We'll ask you again in 20 years then.
Yeah, assuming I'm still around, yeah.
Well, Jake, what are you working on these days?
Well, currently, I'm actually running a team. I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to say, but I'll just say I'm working with a team called Forgotten Empires, who are a distributed team, and they have been working on newer versions of the Age of Empires franchise for Microsoft. So they put out early this year Age of Empires Definitive Edition, which is basically Age of Empires 1, revamped with a totally new renderer, improved pathfinding, and a all new sound, and lots of AI improvements, and all of the expansion packs all in one go. It's like $20, I think, on the Windows 10 store. And we're working on another Age of Empires product, and I don't think it's officially been announced, so I can't really talk about it. But I'm sure it wouldn't take much for anyone to work out what it really is going to be.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you, Jake, and it's amazing that you're still so passionate about the games industry. We've really enjoyed sharing all your memories, so thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.